Our first speaker is Ambassador Nirupama Rao, and to list her many accomplishments would take us well past dinner. Her CV is there circulated for all of you to see, but a few highlights. From the time Ambassador Rao joined the diplomatic service at the age of 22 in 73, after acing the exam, she has made it almost a habit to shatter glass ceilings. She was India's first woman spokesperson in the MEA, the first woman High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka and to the People's Republic of China, India's second woman Foreign Secretary, and at the end of her term was appointed India's ambassador to the US. Very few can boast of such an exemplary diplomatic career, but she wears her many hats with characteristic dignity and self-confidence. She has held the Jawaharlal Nehru Fellowship and was visiting scholar at the India-China Institute at the New School. She's a public policy fellow at the Wilson Center. She's a practitioner-in-residence of the prestigious Bellagio Center, and the list goes on and on. She was also listed as among the 100 most influential women by foreignpolicy.com, and she serves on a variety of boards of think tanks, educational institutions. She has won several awards. But there is one thing I do want to mention, which not many of you may know, that is her passion for music. Her album, Peace is My Dream, transports you to another realm of experience, as does her book, The Rain Rising. Her foundation, which is set up the South Asian Symphony Orchestra, is a cultural SARC plus to build peace in the region and draws on young people of the 8 countries of the SARC region to create a kind of cultural Asian commons. And her orchestra performs here at the India International Center, Diamond Jubilee celebration conclusion tomorrow at 5:30 in the Fountain Lawns. And I would urge all of you to come and witness diplomacy at work. I also want to acknowledge Tete of the India International Center, without whom none of this would have been possible. So a woman for all seasons indeed. Nirupama, may I ask you to kickstart the discussion? And we know that you're going to speak to several issues, but primarily your own experiences on the of being a woman negotiating in what was in essentially a male space, the challenges for women in diplomacy, the changing contours of diplomacy, the opportunities we have in our G20 presidency, because that indeed is the flavor of the year or the month, facets of feminist foreign policy, especially this year, and you've had the unique privilege of serving both in China and the United States. What were the specificities, the opportunities, the differences, the challenges? We're all eager to hear from you, Nirupama. Over to you. 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Meenakshi, and my greetings to the distinguished panel that I share a place with this afternoon, and to all friends and former colleagues also present here. It's wonderful to be back in Delhi. I live in Bangalore, many, many miles away from here. So when I come back to Delhi, I realize what a different world it is here. Before I start, I know that I have just 10 minutes allotted to me, and one can speak on and on about gender and foreign policy. I'd like to start by recalling the words of our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, who mentioned that India's soul was really feminine. And these were his exact words. India has always seemed to me to have broadly more the feminine qualities than the masculine. Of course, the masculine qualities are there and have played an important part in her history and continue to do so. Nevertheless, the feminine qualities seem to me to predominate. Essentially, she is gentle and peaceful, even though on occasions she may indulge in brutal and callous behavior. That is why I think that Indian women, from whatever part of the country, represent the essence of India, more perhaps than the men, unquote. And when Dr. Gopinath just quoted Vijay Lakshmi Pandit's words that it is better to sweat in peace than bleed in war, something that inspired me when I started the South Asian Symphony Foundation. I think those words also encapsulate this feminine soul of India. Now, I've spoken and written on this subject on some occasions in the past few years, so I don't want to repeat what I've said. But since I was asked to speak from my experience, I thought within the short time allotted I would. And I would say that in my own life, I've been witness to the evolving position of Indian women in the Foreign Service and in the making of foreign policy. When I joined the Foreign Service in 1973, it was a very different world altogether. I mean, geopolitically, economically, the place of India on the global stage, the young democracy we were then, everything seems to be so changed today, almost 50 years on. When I joined the Foreign Service and filled in the UPSC examination application form, when I gave my choice, first choice as the Indian Foreign Service, I had to confirm and give an undertaking that I was not married, that I was single, that I was a single woman applying to join the Foreign Service. Because if you were married, you were not qualified to join the Foreign Service. So you started with that tint of bias, and which was, of course, removed subsequently, I think within the next year. But it has been a very gradual, I would say, uphill journey for women in any foreign service of the world. So I wouldn't just exclude the Indian Foreign Service as standing apart from other foreign services in the world, because when I joined the Foreign Service, there were very few women ambassadors across the global stage from any country of the world. In fact, our first career woman ambassador was appointed to Hungary in 1970, and she was the legendary Ambassador C.B. Muthamma, of whom all of you know. And Ambassador Muthamma, in her own life, I think, symbolized for many of us a very pioneering figure who took on the system, and a system that was really blemished by what Supreme Court Justice Krishna Iyer said was the stain of sex discrimination. And she took it on because she was denied promotion to grade 1 of the Indian Foreign Service, which is the senior most level for diplomats in the Foreign Service. When she was denied an appointment as secretary to the Government of India in the Ministry of External Affairs in 1978 or so, she petitioned the Supreme Court about it. And that's how this whole case, this very epic judgment was delivered by Justice Krishna Iyer, when he said that there is this misogyny within the Foreign Service that has to be tackled. The government, in the meanwhile, gave her that promotion. So the case, in a sense, the petition was dismissed. But when the justice did so, he said, I dismiss the petition, but I don't dismiss the problem. And the problem was really this exclusion as far as women were concerned. And this level of, may I call it, discomfort when it came to a male-dominated world, understanding or trying to understand what the entry of women into it would be. But I think things have changed tremendously since that landmark decision in the late 1970s. And by the mid-1980s, when I was becoming a mid-level career officer, I think the universe opened up much more for women diplomats in our foreign service. For instance, I came, a lot of people in my cohort came to work on very sensitive bilateral relationships that India had with her neighbors or with the big powers. It was not that women were relegated to dealing with relationships that were on the periphery, or dealing with soft subjects, or subjects that would not cause any trouble to whatever happened to the government's position. That had changed, and I think that had a lot to do with the changes that were taking place in India itself. We had, as you know, Mrs. Indira Gandhi as our Prime Minister, and she played a very, very leading role in the formulation of our foreign policy, particularly, as you know, with the birth of Bangladesh and the whole, India-Pakistan relationship in the early 1970s, the outlook towards America, the opening, the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation with the Soviet Union. So in a sense, a woman was the architect of that, and that became obviously a kind of a North Star, if I may say, for women in public service. And when I think of women in diplomacy today and Indian women in diplomacy today, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the larger picture. We have to think of it as women in public service, women across the board who joined the civil service in the service of government. And when Dr. Gopinath spoke about the percentage of women in the foreign service today, which is not very much, I think it hovers around 25%, up and down. I was looking at the figures for women in the Indian administrative service, which is a larger service, and it's just about 21%. So you see, the representation, the R word, is so important for women across the board in all sections of the public service. And it's very difficult to dissociate diplomacy from the workings of the other sectors of government, especially for a country of the global south, such as India, a developing country, a country with so much on its agenda in terms of upliftment of our population. So diplomacy cannot really be seen, it's not a laboratory issue here. You have to think of it as connected to the larger ambit of the workings of public service in this country, which makes it so important, I think, for us as members of the Foreign Service to think of ourselves as integrated into that whole ecosystem. We don't operate alone. And I think the numbers of women who serve the government has to go up. We have to see more women coming into public life, and including, of course, diplomacy. But coming back to the subject that I referred to about the numbers of women in the foreign service, the numbers who head embassies, consulates, high commissions, that definitely more and more women are coming to occupy sensitive positions. My colleague Riva here has been High Commissioner to Bangladesh, and I've been High Commissioner to Sri Lanka and Ambassador to China, which is, I think, an index of the trust that the system is reposing in you as a woman, in your level of competence, in your experience, in your ability to deal with sensitive situations when you're appointed to a position such as that. So I think India has been extremely, I would say, very progressive in its approach to giving women more and more responsibilities of a very, very sensitive and high-powered nature. It's just that the numbers have to go up. And I also think of our own situation in South Asia, where we are the least integrated region of the world. And I think I often feel the need that there has to be much more of an interconnection between the women of the region, women in public service, of the region, not only in diplomacy, because we share so many issues of concern. We share so many priorities when it comes to the well-being of our people. And perhaps we can put our minds together to create that elusive, very utopian idea of a South Asian commons, which I think is necessary from the point of view of our geography and our history and the challenges that we face, whether it's climate or migration or natural disasters. So I'm just trying to set the stage for our discussion here. I'm sure the distinguished panelists will take it forward and bring into the scope of our dialogue many, many more issues. But I've just tried to flag a few things and to say that the world has to open much more for women in government, women in diplomacy. But from my own experience, I can say that the light is shining. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Rao. You rightly flagged the issue of not just numeric but substantive representation for women, and also that an expansive footprint abroad cannot coexist with a shrinking footprint domestically, and the connection between the two. Thank you.